I spent the last 2 days working up at our 6-acre site, doing a nice back-to-back marathon working session. Worked pretty far into the evening last night doing mowing and planting and pruning and some fence work. And this morning doing a bunch more planting, some more mowing. I thought it would be nice to take a long form wander through the landscape, show folks what's going on here later spring on the way towards early summer, so stick around. I'll start with these raised beds. I've documented this process in other videos. You can check those out if you'd like. And now every bed is planted, some a little bit more thoughtfully than others, but this one just got some cabbages and parsley this morning. This one's got kale. There's room for some other things to happen. Those are growing really happily. Haven't watered these at all, but we also did get a fair bit of nice rain recently. Seeing Good King Henry looking really, really happy here. And we are close to seed harvest, which is kind of fun. Bunch of beets growing in there, more kale, lots happening in here. It's sweet to see how well these are functioning. It's convenient that we got some good rains, and I also feel like these beds were doing pretty well before the rains when it was drier. I think as the plants get deeper down into the hugel mound, down to the logs below, like this squash has clearly found a vein of fertility and moisture that's really even down low. They should be able to take off pretty nicely. Got some browse from deer on the tomatoes on the north end of this bed. I'm gonna put my Good King Henry seed here just because. But yeah, overall it's growing well in here. We'll do some more updates as we go. If there's some sort of failure going on, we'll definitely share it. But so far so good for hugel mound raised beds. I'm gonna take a walk out to the west end of the property. That's where most of our more intensive production work is happening. It's kind of nice to see how well the trees have been growing in here. We've got persimmons on both sides doing amazingly well. It's kind of amazing how many persimmons from seed end up being male. Like that's a male, this one's a male, there's another one over here, that one's a male. Be beautiful if they were all female, but oh well, we got lots of males and some females. It's nice and shaded on the main walk out there. It stays so cool even in the heat of summer. Take a quick detour over to the pond. A little disappointing, but it is what it is. The pond level has dropped quite a bit. We had pretty intense hot and dry for a while, and we did get some rains, but not enough to really flow in and refill. So it's here, it's holding some water, but it's not very, very deep. You can see the high water level line over there. So it went down about 2 feet, which is pretty significant for this small of a space. But it's an opportunity to think about seeding out the boundaries, the edges. If it keeps getting drier, it'd be nice to have some cover crops in there. And maybe I need to return to the idea of cutting down some of the trees that are in the berm. I suspect they're making it a little bit leaky. But the plants planted on the boundary are doing really well. There's Antovnica apple over here. There's currants all throughout. The rhubarb's super happy. There's goji berries over there, gumi berries. That part's really booming. Be fun if you could actually smell what I'm smelling right now. The Valerian is getting into peak flower. If you look out across the landscape, you can see Valerian flower. Valerian's actually a pretty strong character in this landscape. It's like a really thick, musky honey sort of smell. It's a very, very tolerant plant. It can handle deer browse, it can handle shade or sun, it can handle extreme wet, and makes a very potent sedative medicine. Valerian, similar vibes, but it's a really sweet plant to have here, and just neat to have a great nectar flow for the predatory wasps right now. I'm still on the way out to the far end, but I thought I'd take a detour and look at some of the bamboo. This is one of our largest varieties. This is all new growth since May, which is just kind of hard to get your head around how fast these plants grow. So this whole thicket was cut out in the spring because we needed the bamboo for fencing trees. And this is all new growth with an understory of Valerian again. There's some hazelnuts all through here that are handling the shade pretty decently. But eventually what we'll do is start cutting the bamboo more aggressively around the hazelnut, around the persimmon, around the bur oak, which is this character here. There's plum and there's autumn olive. And over time, we'll select the bamboo out in order to promote those other plants. So you can see the autumn olive here and the plum, but they don't seem to be too upset with the amount of shade right now. It's not that competitive yet, but it's nice to have that option to harvest more fencing material as needed. Seem to not be able to get myself out to the far end of the property, but there's lots to see on the way. So just following through that bamboo grove a little bit. Here we are in a woodland glade. This is a pretty neat context in here. There's a lot happening. Maybe I'll explore it a little in detail right now. But this is basically maybe a 1/16 of an acre, a very small spot. I cleared this, boy, 8 years ago, 10 years ago from the ash and pine that were in here. And so you can see that way is due south. And really the only amount of direct sunlight is however many hours that is. Probably 3 to 5, somewhere in there, depending on the time of year. So it is definitely a shaded context. But I'll tell you, boy, oh boy, pawpaws, they don't mind. These are coming into their 3rd year. So we're gonna have some absolute extra large pawpaws available. Probably too big for shipping, most of them, by the time they're done growing. But we'll have some that'll fit. But it's really sweet to see it fully exposed to deer in the deep shade, partial sun, but mainly shaded context of the woods. The pawpaw nursery beds absolutely thrive. And Juan went through the other day and did a pretty thorough weeding on our sweet Sicily bed, which is this friend here. Looks like a bunch of baby ferns. So that's our nursery stock for next year. Also very tolerant of partial shade. So it's really sweet. And then it moves into actual permanent plantings in here. There's some English walnuts. There's some pink currants, which do well in this context. And then it moves into the real winners for partial shade, which are black currants. So there's some red currants, but then row after row of different varieties of black currant. And then autumn olive to the north, where it's sunnier, to provide a little bit of shelter and a different sort of crop and some nutrient for the other plants that are in here. We chop and drop the autumn olive and feed it to the currants as needed. This scene in here just has such a sweet feeling. It's really comfortable, and on a hot day, you can be in the shade harvesting. On a cool day, it keeps the wind off of you. It's just a really nice spot. And I think by bringing all this compost and fertility and watering for these nursery beds, it's actually helped some of the ash that are in here have their needs met. This is actually a really healthy ash, considering how much the ash borer is dominant in a lot of areas. It feels like those trees that were left right around the boundaries of this glade have been thriving with the amount of fertility that's been brought in for all the new understory crops that are in here. We'll keep meandering through. Like I said, I've been doing a lot of mowing. I use an electric push mower with a big bag on the back so I can collect all the clippings, but my God, does it take a lot of time. This was mowed maybe a week or 2 ago, and it already is regrowing. I don't mow that frequently. It's probably 3 or 4 times a season, but you can see we need to have access through here, and so the mowing must be done. I try to use a scythe when it gets really tall, but eventually I'd like an electric riding mower again that works. My other one died. But here we go. We're moving through another bamboo grove. This is a much smaller variety. It's a great utility type. This is all new growth from this year as well. Getting spooky how fast these are expanding. We need animals in this landscape like sheep or goats that we can feed these to, and we do plan to do that someday, but not just yet. Coming through, beautiful big old apple. This makes the latest apples I've ever met. I've eaten yellow apples from this in December. Now we had a really brutal freeze in this area, but these trees were in the shelter of pines nearby. You can see some pines off to the west. Sorry for all the swinging here, but there's some pines off to the east. And I think what happened is these trees, a couple of the apple trees in here, their blossoms were sheltered from the extreme cold because they were semi-woodland. Open orchards around here got hit pretty hard, but here we've got fruit all throughout. Like, this is loaded with hundreds and hundreds of apples. This tree is only about 20 feet away, but it's way more open around it. You can see it's like a normal orchard-looking context of lots of sky, and this one has no apples. I think it was just a little too exposed in that freeze. It's kind of interesting to see. So old apple tree tucked in with lots of trees around them, loaded to the brim with apples. those out in an open field, zapped. We'll wander out this way to some more nursery production zones. This is a bed that was in Turkish rocket for a few years. It's cool, they re-sprout from the roots, so it's pretty competitive with all the other stuff in there. I don't even really pull the garlic mustard in a Turkish rocket bed. They pretty much beat out most of the other characters that are around them. Another bed here was Good King Henry, still is. Good seed harvest to be had here soon. This was the first year I've realized deer eat them when they're desperate, so that's fun. So I've got to figure out, I'm working on, and I'll talk about it in this video, I'm working on a perimeter fence that's a little bit more robust than the brush walls that we've had in the past, so hopefully we can turn the deer browse off. But they're tolerating it, and from a nursery standpoint, it's completely acceptable what's happening with that amount of browse, because we sell them when they're dormant plants, and you'd never know that they were browsed when they go return back to the earth. A nice thicket of rhubarb grown from seed. It's interesting to see how little genetic diversity there is. They're all red stems, just like their parents. And everywhere there's gaps, we put in a purple asparagus. So we'll start harvesting the rhubarb more intensively to facilitate a new asparagus patch in here. That ought to be fun. Nice bronze fennel bed, pretty weedy, but bronze fennel don't care, so it works out fine. Such a beautiful color to have in the landscape. And this is another plant that is 100% deer proof, which is very helpful. There's so much going on out here. It's really fun. Another nursery bed that's starting to segue into more of a planted bed. We left some goji, we left some black currant, we left 2 red currant, we left 2 more goji here, and dug up the rest for sales. And now we've got this nice production row of a couple cultivars of all those plants. So as time goes on, we're trying to transition away from annual rotation systems where we have to keep up with weeds and turn the soil and seed things out and let them move up into succession, get established. I cached a bunch of hay bales before the rains came so that I could follow the rains with some mulch, and so that's what we were doing the other day, just mulching around these plants. Finally have elderberries that are taller than the deer browse can handle. You can see they're nibbling everything that's convenient and low. It's definitely a high priority nibble for the deer, but they're growing through it. Then we come into a production block that just blows my mind how loaded with exquisitely delightful things this is. These are all Jonker Vertet's red currants. We're a little ways away from the harvest, but I mean, here's one stem. You can see how much fruit is on that one. These are bending over with their fruit set this year. That frost did not bother red currants, which is really awesome. It didn't bother honeyberry, and it really did not bother seaberry. You can see the fruit ripening up in here all throughout. We just got tree after tree of seaberries that are dripping with fruits, and those are the males that pollinate those ladies, and the males are providing extra nitrogen for the currants. I think we're going to offer a huge amount of red currant cuttings next spring because these have been bent over so much that our walkway is gone. 100% I'm going to have to cut every single stem that's leaning out over the walkway. So these super goobery, monstrous red currant types can be propagated by folks out there. It's crazy how big these fruits get, and they're not even ripe yet. They got a ways to go. They'll get much bigger. You can see seaberry is starting to become more and more of an element out here. This area has a lot of sun on this end of the property, huge deer browse exposure. It can be very wet in the spring and then pretty dry in the summer, and seaberry is just so good at handling all that. It's the honey badger of shrubs. It just can grow. It does it wherever it grows. Gardens everywhere. This area gets to be a lot more tended and focused, with the exception of that thing. We never got around to weeding in there and planting out vines this year, so oh well, we'll have to come back to that. But then we get into some more production beds here. This was just planted out today. Winter squash on a boundary here to climb and maybe go up this trellis. Bunch of hot peppers. We got peaches all through here with cuttings of elderberry on the side. Little trial of containers of pure compost with hot peppers in them, and then a whole bunch of new plants from my friend Roger at Ort Family Farms. There's a red yastaberry, big life goji berry, a bunch of really interesting new to me pink and white currants. It's pretty exciting. Thanks, Roger. Gets a bit more feral again over in that direction, and then a bit more productive again over in this direction. We've got a nice solid long-lived planting. These are all red currants through here with autumn olive and cultivar black caps down the line, and that's to the north of these production beds. And here we've got a whole bunch of cuttings of elderberry and more rhubarb seedlings going on, and then it gets a little bit more feral again. It just goes back and forth. Some beds, you know, these little on contour beds that are meant to be in rotation for a little bit, and then it gets weedy and kind of gets to be a little bit too much to figure out what to do to reclaim it. So we try to plant it out to long-lived plantings and just let it move up through succession. So this will do some sort of treatment in the fall. Here's a bed that I kind of lost being able to keep up with the weeds, so I just dug a hole, planted in a nice big elderberry, a bunch of cultivar goji berries, and we'll just keep mulching and let it move up into a shrub, a solid shrub layer. Put some focus on this area yesterday. This is a area that Juan and I fenced off a few years ago to have protected nursery. And the deer don't jump into here. It's a really simple, big, open, easy way to get in. You can see all the trees that did not get deer browse that were in here. There's hazelnut growing. There's a whole bunch of seedling wild apples in here. There's hickories and heart nuts and Japanese walnuts. There's shipmass locust and OP367 poplar. So there's a really nice tree representation in here. And then it was awfully weedy, and so I just stepped over a lot of the weeds, pinned them down with some compost, and then dug in and put really nice big transplants of cabbages that I bought from a local Amish nursery. I got these because they were too big for their normal sales anymore, and so got these plants for 15 cents a piece. And so we just put in cabbage, and it's super weedy all around them, but we'll just let them grow for a little bit, and as the weeds come up, we'll pin the weeds down and put hay around them, compost around them, soil, and hopefully get a seriously large cabbage harvest while we're trying to reclaim the space from being a little bit too far gone with the weeds. I don't think I'd have the energy to come in and do weeding and mulching just for the trees that are in here, but if there's also an annual crop that we can be harvesting in the next 60 days or so, it kind of incentivizes me to come in and water these, which means these get watered, which means those get watered, and mulch around them and bring compost, which means that gets fed, which means those get fed. So it kind of stacks function. I'm gonna wander over to some of our water tanks. I need to check them anyway. This one I filled this morning. This has a few hundred feet of old garden hose going all the way back to a building on the corner of the property where we've got some tanks. You can see the hoses just keep on going. If we follow that back, it's just section after section plugged into each other. All the way back, you can see the metal roof way off in the distance. There's 2 tanks off that roof, and the hose takes forever to fill, but if I'm out here working for the day, I can just put it in this tank and let it fill. It took about 6 hours to just slowly trickle in, and then watering cans are loaded. I like to keep them filled in between sessions so that they're easy to just grab and water. And now we can deal with the watering needs of any of the plants that are in here. So right now it's these onions, some currants that are growing over there, but most importantly, it is the air prune boxes. These are quite a requirement to have water available in a landscape if you want to do air prune boxes, because the plants are not connected to the earth. So we've got little air prune box thickets all throughout, and then tanks to provide them water. This one's got a float valve, but I think the distance is just so long and it's going up to get here that it's just a steady drip. But I'm just gonna go, I'm away for a few days and I'll come back and see what it's done. You know, when it gets high enough, it'll shut off, but probably over the next 2 or 3 days, it'll put about 100 or 200 gallons of water in here at a very slow rate, and then I can use that water to take care of the needs of the chestnut trees, which are recovering beautifully after that freeze. So it does look like we'll actually have decent numbers of chestnuts and hopefully hazelnuts to offer up in our next shipping season. It's always hard to know where to cut these things off. I feel like I I could probably walk for an hour or two, but I also need to do some other work. Would love to hear from folks. Are there certain aspects of this system that piqued your interest, but it feels like I did not get into enough detail with? By the way, that's all goomy. Can't wait for that crap. Are there areas where you get, you see it in the background, but I never talk about it and you'd want to hear more about it? Well, mention it in the comments. Maybe you can put a little timestamp of what you're looking at and what you'd like to know more about. If it's a quick question, I'm happy to answer them in the comments. But if it's more detailed and more information that you're looking for, maybe I'll do another video about what's going on out here. Just seeing fruit everywhere. There's Night King cherry behind me. They're just loaded this year. Even with that freeze, I think with enough diversity, things work out. If we were just a peach orchard in one big open field, we'd have nothing this year. If we were just an apple orchard in the middle of an open field, we'd have zero fruit. But we have tons of persimmons that are forming. The pawpaws did fine because they were under trees. Most of the small cane fruits, they flower later, or they flower in a way that's much more tolerant of freezing. It's pretty amazing. You get enough different plants growing together and you almost are always guaranteed food no matter what the season. Anyway, that's enough for now, and back to work a little bit. Some mowing, and then I've got to get going. Take care.